Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today is the final day of our conference, Creating Community Vitality for the California Main Street Conference. I'm Amanda Elliott, Senior Program Officer and Director of California Programs, and we are going to get started. So I think we have a brief sponsor video that we wanted to show, and then we will get started with our session. Thank you. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. And we are about to get started with our first session of the morning, and that's Main Street 101 board engagement. We know how challenging it can be to keep our board engaged and active and supporting our programs. And so today, joining me to talk about that is Joy Cuartero Austin, and she's a certified economic development practitioner through the International Economic Development Council with a passion for community and workforce development. She specializes in nonprofit management, strategic planning, and board development and production and program development of the arts. Joy is also a small business owner and a property developer. So a wide range of experience, and now a senior program officer with National Main Street. So welcome, Joy.
Thank you for that, Amanda, and thanks for having me here today to talk to you about board engagement. Obviously, as Amanda was saying, it really is essential to creating that strong foundation. And this session, we're going to start to kind of dive into some of the best practices and roles and responsibilities, and how do you really kind of nurture your board. So we're going to start off with a brief sort of Main Street approach and overview. Nothing too in depth, but just to kind of get on the same page, and then start to think about like, how are you really identifying your board members, those qualities, and again, how you're really explaining to them what it means in terms of roles and responsibilities. Get into a little bit about the recruitment process, and then what does it look like when you're bringing them onto your organization's board, in terms of orientation, and then how do you continuously engage them throughout the process, and of course, recognition and retention. What does that look like? So a lot of different things to kind of dive into today, but really just wanted to let you know, this is also conversational. So if there is something that pops up as I'm speaking on a topic, please feel free to interject questions in the chat or take yourself off mute to ask those questions. I tend to speak a little bit quickly, so also let me know if I need to kind of retract and go back. But if you could go to the next slide. So again, kind of starting off, again, just a brief Main Street overview on the Main Street approach. Really kind of, why are we all investing in our downtowns? Obviously, for us, I'm kind of speaking to the choir a bit here, but it's really about that attraction and retention. But I really do always like to start with the why in mind. Downtown commercial districts, they really are our economic anchors. High density, high return, investment per dollar when you're really kind of looking at what you're putting into your downtown. There's that density of services and resources. It's really to, helps absorb that economic impact. And as we could tell sort of after coming out of a lot of the pandemic recovery efforts, it really is the beginning for our economic recovery, our downtown districts. So it's really important to help and invest in our downtowns. Those kind of density of services creates that diverse employment opportunity. And of course, we find it to be a preferred location for a lot of our different small business industries. And it's a great place to really start to look at how do we really develop our small businesses and entrepreneurs by utilizing our downtown districts. And then, of course, we have a lot of different mixed use and reuse opportunities that provide a lot of increase to our tax base. So I always say that the health of our community is very much reflected in the health of our downtown. So that is really why it's so important to invest. And then in terms of sort of like the Main Street approach, that really is about the power of partnership. We're putting that focus on economic impact and creating, again, that potential for more change in Main Street. It's broad community engagement, which is why it's really important to start again with your board, because you really want to be able to reflect basically the transformation strategies that you have and everything in your work plans. And then, of course, we want to make sure that everything that we are doing and working on provide those tangible outcomes and help communicate the impact that we have on our community through our Main Street program. And it really is something that, we want to offer that, again, greater organizational flexibility, allowing Main Streets to choose how to organize themselves. I know there's a lot of different communities here, and you all, again, have unique challenges that you're working on and unique ways to approach those challenges. So that's really, again, about the power of partnership in Main Street. But in the end, I always say that we're leading community economic development. So just the next slide, please. So we are there again, using that 4-point approach, organization or outreach, being able to, again, raise money, recruit volunteers, design that physical improvements to the space, promotion, positioning or the district and marketing your efforts. Again, bringing people into the community, but then also showing that your community what your organization does for them. And then, of course, economic vitality, business recruitment and retention, entrepreneurship development, and really, again, bringing economic development to your community. So just kind of quickly getting in a little bit of a deeper dive into the approach for organization, really, again, helping your communities build that broad-based support for their district. Main Street, again, brings community together. It really is there to help reach consensus and lead revitalization efforts. So again, having a strong board to kind of start that foundation is very important to start to lead that revitalization process. Organization is also there to really help develop those partnerships and assemble those resources that you have, whether or not it's the human side or the financial side. Again, there to really kind of help, build what the consensus is for that vision, get those resources together and lead that approach. And then when we move into design, that's that physical improvement to the space, right? So it's really providing your community with the tools that they need to really improve that appearance of the district. I tend to see that this is one of the first places that we really try to look at when it comes to starting to engage a Main Street program in general. What does it look like when people are entering into your district? You want to be able to preserve that character because it is truly what makes your community unique. I think I am from sort of the west suburbs of Chicago, and I remember, kind of going from area to area, you could barely tell when you're entering into a new space because everything was sort of the same. You start, with one big box store to another, and it just sort of all blends together. But when it comes to our commercial and historic districts and something that really makes our community unique, you can really tell when you've arrived. So design is really that important part about promoting that physical space. And then moving into then economic vitality. Again, this is something that really kind of helps with strengthening and diversifying your local economy. You really kind of help position your district's economy through market-driven business retention and development strategies. You're attracting new investment, developing, whether it's incentivizing economic development projects or developing housing initiatives. This is really the way to help, again, with your entrepreneurs, your small businesses, and your property owners, really kind of bringing them into the conversation, making sure that they are also there in step with the vision that you have for your downtown, and also treating them like those small businesses. How are we really encouraging them and promoting them and helping them grow as they sort of develop their properties? And then last, promotion, again, sort of really positioning the district again as that center of activity. Main Street programs really provide communities with the tools to bring people back to that center, to the heart of your community by positioning your downtown and really marketing your district's unique characteristics and then fostering that positive image. And again, all of these things in the approach being the work kind of starting from that board of directors that you bring around you and how you engage them and your other volunteers in the process and how you really kind of encourage that pipeline. So in the end, our revitalization work, it really is a balancing act. So just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind throughout the session, how balanced is the work of your downtown? How do you look at all of those 4 points and see, where are your strengths? Where are some of the challenges? Where can you maybe start to think about specific programming? And from there, how can you then position the leadership roles and bring them into the mix? How is your board balanced also in the work of the 4 points? Knowing that Main Street is such a great way to build leadership and to build engagement in your community. It's really good to kind of look at the 4 points and see where you might consider bringing somebody on, where maybe you have a lot of people interested in preservation and buildings and design, but maybe not a lot of folks in that economic vitality. So how do you sort of also balance your board to also balance your work? Making sure that you've got not only small businesses on there, but also your property owners, and then also looking towards, how you build your partnerships and your maybe civic engagement. So just, as you think about the work being balanced, how do you also balance your board? And then in terms of what your board is to do really with the vision, you're really, again, establishing that for your downtown, that vision for your downtown that encourages that kind of participation. Successful board development really starts with that plan. Your organization helps to look at your district strengths, again, through data and community engagement, consensus building. You look at what's unique about your district to leverage those strengths and be sure to align them then with your activities, which of course will change over time, because I always say that, in terms of the revitalization efforts, it really is a journey. It's not a destination. You are going to be able to hit lots of different goals and you're going to check a lot of boxes, but then it sort of just continues. And you really are just building leadership and a board to help continue that work with you. Having that vision for your community that aligns with where you are and where you want to be, again, is also that foundation for your work, and then also recruiting leaders. So, really start to think about always the future, be inspiring, and, again, that community vision that aligns with current and future goals helps really with that retention and recruitment effort. Going into the board members like roles and responsibilities, you want to be thinking about building that pipeline and how to engage other leaders for that vision for the future. It's hard sometimes to think ahead that way, but I always, as you kind of encourage, different people to come in and out of board leadership, it's really just making sure that you have people that are taking ownership of that vision, that are also engaged in your organization, and that have that volunteer spirit, because really your board members are the ones that are going to lead that charge. In terms of sort of like board member identification, here are just a few key considerations. So board members, they're the superheroes. It's a big job. They're there to really advocate. They're there to commit that time or money or other support. They help you take that action. And again, they sort of are the ones that are helping you shape the vision for the greater good of where you're going in your community. And again, like the success of the commercial district and those efforts are very largely dependent on the board. So I think that, in terms of really building that support, you want to be able to develop new leadership and encourage that people kind of go through and engage with your organization from volunteer to committee to committees, to chairs, and really kind of maintain that focus and rely on the skill sets of the people that you bring into the organization and that you're identifying for that role. So, and going into a little bit more about that identification process, you do want to also look at your community. Everybody's demographics is different, and I always start from there. I look at community's demographics and see, okay, how am I representing my community on my board of directors? And then, of course, also when it comes to the skills that they have, workers' wisdom, warrior, wealth, and again, really thinking about that diverse set of stakeholders, not just for where your organization is now, but truly where it wants to be and how you want to get there. If you're thinking that your focus is going to change from a preservation focus, because maybe a lot of your property owners have taken advantage of facade programs already, and now you're really working on those first floor commercial spaces, or maybe even thinking about working on second and third floors commercial spaces, what does that look like in terms of bringing people on? Those that are represented in your board of directors can be both inside and outside of the district. Again, making sure that you're also looking at different engaging youth, different cultures, different backgrounds, and then also your partnerships to be sure that you're working with, maybe it's your tourism or your park district or education. Sometimes healthcare is also a big, driver for downtowns. It depends on where you are and what you're doing, but just to, again, to kind of make sure that it's diversified. I have a little example here of, an identification like assessment. This was more about volunteers, but, it's something that you can definitely still use and modify in terms of gearing it towards your board members. But assessments is, I think, a great way to kind of see what skills are currently on the board, which ones you might be missing and that you might be most in need of. You can really start to make a list throughout the year of those potential new board members, because I think recruitment really is something that happens all the time. It's something that it should be in the background, at least all the time. And this is a worksheet that can kind of help think about the people in your community and those that would like to volunteer, kind of move them in your direction. But, in terms of when you make contact with folks, always be honest with them about that work that's expected from board members, especially in Main Street organizations. We are working boards. So it's not something where they're just going to be at a meeting and vote on certain things. There, you want to be able to set those higher expectations and standards, and then create that waiting list for people to be able to serve. A couple of different tools to consider when it comes to that. There's, again, your board's needs assessment, define those needs, again, through the strategies you have going on or future strategies. That's also very much derived from your work planning. And then, look at an interest form, perhaps, maybe that's the description of, here are the different things that we have going on. Would you be interested in it? You can also have potentially a board application, something that is really explaining the goals of the organization and matching it then with the skill set of that board member. And then a board expectations and job description. I think those things are very important, again, for members to really see what it is that they're getting into and have pride in that they're going to be a part of these solutions. And then all of those types of things that you can have in your toolkit, definitely annually evaluate them and make sure that they're still up to date and they're still in line with the needs of your organization. I think that in the end, again, you're looking at who is needed, what are those roles and responsibilities, and this actually goes into volunteers, committees, again, committee chairs and your board. And then, what is that structure that you would like to get to be able to recruit them? Again, those descriptions, applications, expectations, you're just defining those roles and who it is that you need to be able to get. And then when you choose those board members, really again, look for different types of people that will become actively involved in that planning and implementation, or the strategy for that matter. So one step before the strategy and vision, and then planning and implementation. Those people who can really provide those services, or who have money or access to money that want to be able to invest in those programs and projects. Where are their passions lie? That is also the very nice thing I think about the Main Street program, is that there's so many different avenues and you can hit so many different people's passions. But you really want to have them understand, some of the challenges that you have in your community and be visionaries for the future. So those are just some of those things when you're really looking at those board members. In terms of responsibilities, this is just sort of a overview look, I would say, for the collective board. So again, kind of really assuming those legal and philosophical responsibilities, helping to establish that strategy for the Main Street organization. And then what are the goals for your downtown? They're the ones that are going to be there to help with those policies and procedures for the organization itself. And then also represent, of course, the view of why it's so important to continue to invest in your downtown. And we went back to kind of like being the cheerleaders, they're the cheerleaders for your community. So how do you really encourage that as you're being able to tell them more about what it means to be a board member? They're the ones that end up providing, again, that leadership for the program, and help to really raise those operating and capital funds. And of course, again, they're a working board, so they should be participating in those committee assignments and serve really as those advocates. And of course, follow legal requirements for your nonprofit, depending on what kind of organization you have. And in the end, again, we kind of go right back to sort of programs and strategy. One of the biggest responsibilities for the board is really to guide that and lead the organization through it. So that's looking at your mission and vision, making sure that the program matches the mission and vision, going through any type of strategic planning. And then as you sort of get to the transformation strategy that you have for your community, what then are the work plans that fall under economic vitality, design, promotion, and organization, and how are we measuring that? How the board should also kind of help with the committees to discuss how we measure those things. But board leadership should really be at the helm also at each of those committees, or find a way to serve in some way on those committees as well. So kind of moving forward into recruitment, I mean, really board recruitment and engagement, it's really essential to creating that foundation. And this will really help with being sustainable in the organization. So I think that in general, you want to make sure that you're really kind of building the culture that fosters and rewards your stakeholders. Board roles, I mean, they can match the skills and their background, but really it can also match their passions. There's a lot of times I find that board members, they can have one profession, but they're just really invested in something else that they're passionate about. So how do you kind of have those conversations and find people with those passions? And they're there really to kind of help build that sense of ownership that results in that culture for volunteering for everybody in the community. So they're really leading by example in a way. So you want to really be able to incorporate stakeholders, again, from all sectors, and make sure that they realize that the things that they're doing are what are creating the successes for your community. And in the end, you're building a program that is really worth volunteering for. So you're really offering that value. People that, again, can get in touch with things that they're really passionate about, and really, again, lead that vision, but know that since you're measuring that vision and the steps to take to get there, they're really the ones that are a part of that result. So we would just really want to kind of emphasize raising that bar to build that organizational foundation that you need, to really kind of see the results through and always engage people in the process, and make it something that's really fun to be able to do, is to be there for your community in this space. I think that that's really important because the volunteer opportunities that you have are, they really are very plentiful, and they sort of engage on multiple different ways. So, make sure that you are really clearly defining what those opportunities are for your volunteers and for your board members, what kind of contributions they might be making in terms of time or talents, and really recognizing, the work that they do is so valuable to your community. So share it in all of those successes by really, again, bringing them on board and making sure they understand what they're bringing to the table, that it's very important. This is just a little bit, I've kind of said it a couple times throughout, but a little look really at that leadership pipeline. Because when you, again, are thinking about recruiting and this pipeline, board members definitely need that willingness to lead. You're really cultivating them through different projects and making sure that you're talking about how you're diversifying your board throughout the year. Your officers always kind of also having like a line of succession for them. Making sure too that you have some rotation in all of these spaces, that there are perhaps term limits for your board, that maybe you can move somebody who's super passionate and wants to stay on the board, because we're Main Streeters, we love it so much, we don't want to go, but be able to keep them involved in different ways, maybe even if it's an advisory position or role, advisory with purpose, and really making sure that there's ways for other folks to interact with your organization, but being able to keep them involved even if a term ends, because of course there's many different ways that you can wear different Main Street hats, but essentially we usually start again with kind of helping out. They're just helping with a task, they're volunteering maybe for an event or an activity or stuffing envelopes, and then maybe that's how they get engaged to become more of a committee member, see how the committee runs, and that's also important. You want to make sure that your committees kind of have a structure as well, because you're showcasing that to other potential leaders. So as much as you can be organized in that committee, then they might want to then lead a committee and be a chair. And then from there, they may consider, okay, I want to take it to the next level. I want to actually be the one helping to plan the direction of the programs that are happening. So being on the board, what does that look like for them? And then, of course, moving into having the board understand that eventually we would love for everybody to be a part of the executive committee and be a board officer and move their way then to being president. So what does that look like in terms of timeline for your organization and how you move people through? And I do see some questions in the chat here, so I'm just going to take a quick pause.
There were a couple. So what is the ideal number of board members? And what about having an advisory board? How does that work?
Yeah, so ideal, I think that does somewhat depend on community and population, and kind of also the population maybe of your district. We have had communities that have as few as 9 members, and we actually did recommend for them to open that up to 11 or even 13. And it's just because of the way that the community is growing. They actually just recently annexed it was a couple subdivisions in their communities. They are growing and they just need to kind of represent a little bit more of a broad base. So that's, I know that that's not quite answering the question, but I would kind of stick with population and sort of see if you need to diversify your board and add a little bit more to that conversation, that would be ideal then to add a couple more members. And then I'm sorry, Amanda, you said the next, advisory board. So advisory sometimes works as, it depends. Some people make it a little bit more, I'd say in terms of like fundraising, some people actually go towards that role where it's kind of a part of their fundraising efforts. They sort of look to an advisory role to sort of help a little bit more in that regard, but it's separate. And I would say there are certain organizations that also do an advisory board where it's more of a not such a formal piece of, like, there's not like bylaws that are kind of engaging with that advisory board, but it's sort of like an honorary kind of piece to the program. So it's a representation that you really are going to continue to gain advice from those folks that still hold regular meetings for that engagement, and they're sort of part of that process. But it really is just that. It's a little bit more informal, but a way to really recognize the skills and the talents and continue to gain advice from them. I hesitate a little bit because sometimes people do take it to the next level, and they end up making it part of like a nonprofit piece where, again, they're doing a little bit more formal. They're a little bit more of a formal organization. So it kind of depends on how you would like to take that, but you can start off with it being less formal, and then think about how it might work for your community.
Yeah, a lot of folks use advisory boards to really broaden the work. They connect with other partners that are interested in the work that they're doing around economic development or design or any of those things, and partners or groups of folks that are in those areas that may have that expertise that you don't have or may not be in your expertise of one of your board members. That advisory person can then offer that expertise and kind of broaden, your reach. So that's another way of using an advisory board as well.
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you. And of course, with recruitment, always think outside the box. I always say start them young. The parents of your, or, the board members and their kiddos and things like that, I always invite them to the table. But it's a way of it's not that your board members are going to be very young, but I think that there's actually been times where we've suggested, if there's a connection, say with like a college, or sometimes high schools are within your downtown district, it may be nice to open up a spot for a college student to be able to really get that experience, because you want to be able to also have their voice, especially if you have something like that within your district. But really give families an opportunity, cultivate again that sense of community from a young age, and look at your demographics again, and what are some of those other likely partnerships. Maybe there's also just a YP program, for that matter, that's really strong in your district. So you always find ways to engage with students and young professionals. And again, your changing demographics, how do you really kind of get them involved, and what other partners can you look at that are not necessarily in the district, but that you work with to really, again, engage and help with recruitment. Some of the best practices in terms of recruitment is really that, again, it's something that happens year round. Being able to simply ask, sometimes we kind of get into the grind of things and we think everyone sort of knows exactly what our organizations are doing, but that's not always the case. So ask, especially when you're having fun, right? So when you've got that amazing event that's going on that everybody comes to every year, and they know that, it's the signature event of the year or throughout the summer, make sure that you're asking when people are out there having a great time at your events. Make sure you have that nominating committee to really help the board review those matrix of needs, again, sort of on an annual basis, and considering, again, your strategic planning and how you're really aligning the people with where you want to be. Have sort of an interview form or a question template. So then that way everyone is sort of able to be on the same page as to some of the questions that they ask when they're recruiting. Sometimes this helps also so that you don't have rogue maybe board members that are going and just, recruiting sort of in a way where it might not align with the goals that you have. And then, being able to understand, again, skills and interests. How are you inquiring about that? And how are you also just talking about your opportunities that you have available, and really kind of be able to recruit again year round. So I do have an example there on the right-hand side. This is just a signature, but it's just presenting recruitment in an email signature. That would be an easy way to even start to be able to ask all the time, that it just exists in the staff's email, or if you provide emails for board members, or if they want to even just have it within that space, that, hey, I volunteer for this organization. This is just something that I'm passionate about. If they're able to do something like that on a personal email, then, encourage that year-round recruitment. And then, you know, again, going back to being clear about needs and expectations. What does orientation look like? What do meetings look like? What is it like to be a part of a working board? And how do I engage those board members throughout the year? We also kind of say, have a letter of commitment, you know, especially, you know, knowing that these are the different things that that person is agreeing to, again, the meetings and the structure, and that they're potentially going to be involved in a committee. And then, you know, really kind of make it something where they know that they're going beyond just sitting and being kind of passive on that board. They're really there for action. They're really there to be engaged. So, you know, we always like to also say that language matters. So we want to involve them. We're not using volunteers. We're involving the volunteers. And it's not about, you know, me or saying, you know, kind of those singular words. You just want to always say inclusively us. You know, we're doing this for us and for our community. So I think that, you know, in essence, we just want to make sure that we're really doing these things with people, not for them, with our community, not just for our community. And, you know, because I think we tend to default to taking care of things on our own and doing them sort of alone. And we don't want to do things by ourselves. We want to make sure that we're really engaging our leaders, and we're really engaging, selecting them for our board process. So going into a little bit, you know, for orientation and kind of ongoing engagement, we're really starting a little bit before the official board meeting. So a lot of times it'd be great if we could sit down with them ahead of time. Maybe it's with the board chair presenting sort of that overview again of the goals. The executive director can then provide sort of that Main Street introduction and the 4 points, and how basically the strategy and goals align then with the 4 points. The treasurer can then step in and you know, talk about the budget, explain sort of in detail how that works, and how they're going to be receiving those reports. And then committee chairs potentially explaining also their work in the work plans. Maybe it's not the chair, maybe that also still remains in the executive director piece, but you know, the more that they know about the organization and the people that are kind of helping really implement, again, the strategies and the work plans, the better. And then, you know, really, again, present the history. How did they get there? It's always nice to look back and see, because I think our work always happens slowly over time. And sometimes we forget to go back and see where we were before. So it's always nice to present that history, and then again, go through some of those goals and metrics. And then what is it that's going to happen? You know, with their participation, you've been very purposeful about recruiting this person. So now that you've got them, what's their participation going to do for the organization? What do you feel the outcomes are going to be? And then we do try to repeat these things also for your full board, not even just your new board members, but on an ongoing basis, to just remind your board members during board meetings, and be able to kind of track that progress, and make sure that you're, again, kind of reviewing things annually. But always encourage that conversation, education, and collaboration, that you're there to really serve your community. So there might be other connections that new board members have that they can bring to the table to continue, again, that vision for downtown. Just a few kind of best practices then for, you know, in terms of kind of that orientation. If you'll just go to the next slide, please. Oh, is that, no, that is, sorry. Nope, just kidding, go back. I'm sorry. Have that welcome packet ready, you know, again, and make sure that you've got maybe a board handbook. So the packet itself can kind of contain a lot of different things, but here's just some things that I think are good to go for that welcome letter. Again, that history of your organization, information about your future strategy and direction. Again, all the different work plans, and maybe even some other services that you may, or other programs and services that you may have, bylaws, your organizational structure, and then, of course, different policies. This could include a conflict of interest page that they need to sign, or look at a code of ethics, how you all do fundraising. Some of that is always very different, or how the funding is received in general. And then again, sort of that operations piece. So your organization and committee responsibilities, and what does that look like from kind of the top down? What are they, how does their role also kind of affect the rest of the organization? And then other information about those metrics. So the minutes of past meetings, other reports, budget, things like that, that is definitely needed sort of in that welcome packet, that welcome binder. And then going back to that signed letter of commitment. So they really know this is what I'm here for. I'm here to be able to spend these monthly meetings, but I'm also here to, again, engage in our committees and potentially lead some of that direction. Maybe it's also reporting back from committees. Just depends a little bit on what it is that you need from your board members in terms of those expectations, but make sure that they're signing it so that they know this is what we're expected to do. Okay, now that, yes, thank you. So, ongoing engagement, in terms of the board and what to sort of expect in terms of those responsibilities, really between meetings, being able to touch base on those activities. These are just some ways, again, to encourage board members like throughout the year. Yes, you're going to start out with doing long range and potentially strategic planning. It isn't just project work, but then, how do you also kind of take that and know that you are planning for board and staff, like also leadership sessions. So those are some of the responsibilities that they may have, as well as in terms of how you're engaging throughout the year. Developing policy and potentially crisis management. And we learned a lot of that through the pandemic, but how are they really kind of, setting those policies and reacting to any types of other crises? And then, again, engagement in the Main Street network. So how do we keep with revitalization trends and ongoing education and participation? So the engagement really kind of comes, there are certain points throughout the year that are sort of an annual piece. And then depending on where they are in terms of their involvement with committees, that might be an additional, monthly meeting or something that kind of happens as you gear up towards special events or activities or certain types of services that you're providing your small business owners. And then again, between meetings, just being able to check in with them and the work that they are doing for the organization, and also working to continuously talk about, okay, how are we also recruiting for certain things? How are we building capacity for our organization and thinking about that succession piece? And that can be for, again, both staff and board members. And the next few slides are just kind of some things to think about in terms of ongoing opportunities. These are just some things really from Main Street America, but we do have many different webinars that are put on that we do in conjunction also with our coordinating programs. California Main Street has many training opportunities, so please make sure that you are participating with California Main Street and other things outside of this conference, because they have ways to engage throughout the year. We have different things on project and program funding. We have things on how to manage and lead Main Street programs and create collaboration, marketing, and all of these efforts are kind of, general since we talked to the network. But again, really also engaging in education through California Main Street is very important throughout the year, because they know it's more boots on the ground. They know your communities. They know the challenges that you might be facing. They've heard from you in terms of the things that you would like to learn more about and how to help grow your communities. So definitely, if it's virtual or if it can be in person, then always engage with Amanda and that staff as well. And then actually, if we just kind of flip through a couple of those, because those are just some examples again, but heading to some of the other things that Main Street America can also be there for you. We also do have the Main Street America Institute. So there are also a couple different certifications there: Community Transformation Certificate, Leadership Development Certificate. And one more slide, please. Thank you. And then, of course, the conference. So I don't know how many of you I might be seeing at the national conference, but the conference in Richmond, obviously a really great way to also develop more connections with the network. And I know that Amanda probably has some fun things in store for California as well. So always nice to be able to be together in that space, kind of with learning in terms of professional development. And, you know, again, really being able to network with each other. I think that that's an important piece in general when it comes to, you know, ongoing orientation and ongoing engagement, is that we have these opportunities to provide you with a chance to get to know each other, because sometimes only folks in Main Street can really understand, right? So when you're talking with your other board members or other directors, sometimes that's just a great space to be in, to be able to really engage with that network. And here's the why, because Main Street works. It's a lot. There's a lot of different things that are being juggled. There's a lot of things that are happening with volunteer, with staff, with board members. Sometimes there's too many balls in the air at once. You know, so, you know, really, I think that it's important to also have a network of support and to meet each other, so that you as board members and directors can also understand and learn from each other how to prioritize and make sure that the most important balls are the ones that are staying in the air. And it's okay if one of them falls randomly, because there is a lot of things that are happening. But how do we really kind of, again, work to prioritize and work to make sure that we're always looking at our mission, our vision, our transformation strategy, and that all of the work that we're doing aligns with that effort. So kind of moving forward into recognition and retention, again, a really important piece when it comes to board recruitment throughout. You know, again, going back to mission and your ongoing program evaluation, right? It's something that we kind of go back to the beginning, because this is a retention piece. This is a recruitment piece. You're establishing, again, that vision for your downtown that encourages participation. Your organization is the one that helps look at your district's strengths, again, through data, community engagement, consensus building. You're looking at what's unique about your community and your district to really leverage those strengths, and then be sure to, again, align them with those activities that you have. So those things change as time goes by, but again, you want to be able to have all of those different pieces that encourages participation. And you want to make sure that, again, the vision that you have for your organization is something that also aligns with, you know, goals that also aligns with the goals that you have for your board and volunteer recruitment. So you just want to make sure that you're always looking at where you were, where you want to be, and creating that foundation. So I think that that's always the first step when it comes to being able to retain your board members, is that ongoing evaluation. And then when it comes to those recruitment best practices and tools, again, sort of looking at what motivates people. How, again, does that align with the goals that you have for your organization? Provide them with those opportunities for training. Develop that strong pipeline and support system, because you don't want things to happen where it can cause burnout. There's a lot of stuff going on, and even though you've got some really strong board member, for instance, that has a project that they're super passionate about, and they can totally handle it on their own, always encourage them to have a person that they are training, or a co-chair, or something of the sort that's right there in line with them, that can take over at some point, because you don't want to accidentally create vacuums on the back end. And definitely do this, you know, this type of practice, I think, throughout. Learn to really kind of engage that pipeline from volunteers on up. And then empower them and educate them, again, on your vision to again, make very good and purposeful decisions, and allow, you know, basically to transition into different spaces. So allow for some movement in the board. again, allow for somebody to be able to train somebody else and make that the culture of it. So then that way it's just something that is natural to when you're a part of the Main Street organization, that I'm going to be volunteering, and if I'm really interested, I'm going to help this chair out, and that perhaps someday I will become, the chair of a specific work plan. So just something where you're really kind of purposefully developing that strong pipeline and support system. And then, really be considerate also of time and value for your board members. We have this practice that we actually use at Main Street America. It's called a POP agenda. This doesn't have to be the way that you, consider running meetings, but it's just, a suggestion perhaps. But it's purpose, outcomes, and process. So sort of knowing the purpose, why are we having this meeting? What are we actually doing in terms of taking this, meeting on? What are the outcomes that we want to see, specific outcomes that we want to accomplish as a result? And then the process, what are the steps that we take to achieve these outcomes and fulfill that purpose? So it's kind of a way to be able to sort of really identify in a meeting and make sure that you're valuing, again, the time of board members and valuing the time of committee members, so that you really know exactly what you have to do to run this meeting. And there's a tool that, I can share with everybody that kind of just talks a little bit more through the POP agenda process. But this is just an example of being considerate of people's time and how you can really kind of use to focus creating results and help yourself and help others get like a clear outcome. And then, of course, again, brag about all the different things and activities and programs and keep things fun. Make sure that you're always celebrating those successes and those wins. So this is just a nice little example that I saw there, that they were bragging about upcoming events and activities and different things that are going on, and just really keeping people engaged. You want to keep them fun and share those successes, no matter how small. And make sure that if you're thinking about some of those other small tasks that happen throughout events and activities, for instance, hire those things out. So for instance, I'm talking about barricades being moved or garbage being picked up or something like that for an event. Don't leave those to the volunteers. The volunteers want to have a good time. So think about either hiring those out or maybe some partner organizations that, I know we work sometimes with the football team or the Boy Scouts, and they'll do some of those other tasks, but make sure for some of those higher level tasks and ways that you're really providing, again, the value for people. And then, really kind of hold that high standard for their efforts, because they're the ones that are creating that larger impact. And then, of course, listen and have reciprocal feedback. A time throughout the year to be able to check in, and maybe it's also a check-in guide or an evaluation template, something where it's as executive directors, you might have a way for board members to evaluate your how you are doing. So same goes for board members. Have a chance to be able to evaluate and see how the board member feels about the role and how they're being engaged and what they're doing within the organization. And then, of course, we want to be able to thank and celebrate. So this is very important for all volunteers, and especially for board members. Appreciate them with big and small gestures throughout the year for their time. Whether that's some kind of announcement when they join the board, before and after events, kind of celebrating how board members have helped with something or a program or a workshop. Maybe it's also just at different events and activities, the types of swag or the refreshments that you can serve for them to them, and maybe there's a reception at the end of the year to really celebrate the accomplishments. Something separate from the annual meeting, something that maybe is maybe even more casual. Maybe it's a picnic during something that's going on already, but something that makes it a little bit more fun, and then that bigger recognition at the end of the year. I think that in terms of some of those specific gestures, so again, promoting new board members and why they're joining the board, how it then again relates back to how you have this goal in mind for the organization and for the community, and they're the ones that are the perfect fit to join the board and make that particular piece happen. Private and public praises, little notes of thank you, but then also during events and activities and while everyone is having fun. And then being able to also involve them. So this also goes a little bit to like the advisory board discussion, how you can ask their advice throughout and their expertise throughout meetings. That's also a way of celebrating and thanking them for their expertise and bringing them on the board, or why you brought them on the board. And then again, recognition also at board meetings. As an executive director, I know I used to have this, it was just a little tiny little trophy, and it was just because I noticed maybe that there was a certain board member that was very engaged throughout the month. So I just kind of gave that and passed it around and just let them have their kudos for the meeting. So a different board member would receive that kudos for that board meeting, for their involvement for the month prior. And then again, a possible awards recognition, something that's either again inside an annual meeting, or it can be something separate of, if you want to make it a little bit more fun and casual. And of course, share the success. Ways that you've been successful at recruiting and engaging your board, and in general, the success that you're having in your organization, being able to tie that back to having really strong leadership and being able to have built that foundation, making sure that everybody can sort of, shout that success from the rooftop and celebrate with you. So very important piece of being able to continue to recognize and then build that retention piece right in, because I think everybody always wants to be a part of that overall vision and the overall success that you have created in your organization. So that, my friends, is the presentation. We did want to allow for some time for additional questions. So yeah, please feel free if there's anything else that people kind of took note of throughout the presentation, happy to sit and answer.
Thank you, Joy. That was a really great, comprehensive approach to really engaging our board and looking at things that we need to be thinking about as we take on new board members and to support the board members that we have. One of the things that I recall that was really important in engaging the board is engaging them in your work plan and really developing all of the work that you're going to do throughout the year or the next 18 months. And, maybe speak a little bit to that and, how we can do that and really benefit from that engagement and assigning board members so that they have an actual task, so they know that, what they bring is important, and we need that expertise from each of them.
Yeah, so I always say that not everybody has like a full plan of how they do their work planning in general. So it'd always be good to kind of look at that and just sort of formalize that plan. So how does that work out? Is it that a committee member or a volunteer has an idea? Do they take that to then, the board and kind of start to flesh that out? But I think that thinking through that process and what's good for your organization is a first step. And again, just formalizing your work planning. So taking that and saying, okay, if somebody has an idea, then yes, they then have to talk to a chair or committee chair, or they have to also be the chair if it's something brand new. So you don't accept anything unless there's like a chair. And then, you take that to a board member. The board member maybe is the one that actually does help them through the work planning process, because, all of our board members know exactly how to do a work plan. And then, perhaps at that point, then they can start to kind of take that idea, work plan it, and then maybe it goes to the board to actually approve. So those are certain ways to kind of engage a board in that process. But I think that we don't always write that process down and formalize it. So I think that it starts with that, to be able to engage your board members. And then as the work plans are developed and they're there, then hopefully once you're bringing on new board members, now you have that piece to be able to present to them. And then it kind of is ongoing.
Yeah, really important to kind of work all of those things out, because everyone has great ideas, and often they'll come to, oh, I think we should do this, but you really have to sit and have someone, as you said, chair or assigned to really lead that project. How much will it take to do it? Who's going to do it? How long? All of those things really need to be worked out across, the vision of whatever it is that you're doing. So in order to be successful and have the outcome that you want, you really need to have a full plan put together for that. And so again, we are opening it up to anyone who has questions or comments. Please do weigh in. We want to hear from you. Suggestions regarding executive position of secretary. Is it a hard position and a lot of work? Can be.
Yeah, I mean, Christine, would you mind elaborating a tiny bit on that? Just how to recruit for a secretary? Is that what you're asking?
Sorry, hopefully you can hear me.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Great. No, we have an amazing board and an amazing executive board. Our chair, our vice chair, fantastic. Our treasurer. Secretary has been a position we've struggled with. I am currently taking all the notes. I do the agenda, the financials, executive director summary prior. It's a lot of work. Just wondering, can the note taking be shared amongst board members? I'm not asking them to do an agenda or the financials, but the note taking.
Yeah, I guess traditionally, so you're saying that you also put together the financials, the treasurer doesn't do that piece?
Right now, yes. During COVID, things changed a bit. I do, yes, I do. After our bookkeeper is done and our books are closed, I do a P&L and a balance sheet. I send that out with the agenda that I talk to the chairperson with, and we create the agenda together. We go over talking points. But I send out the entire board packet, and I take the notes during the meeting, which is a little difficult to stay engaged and take the notes. So yes, I've been reminded that we are in violation of our bylaws. In that sense, we need to get that back on track. So just curious if you have recommendations for that position.
It does sound like you're doing the work that isn't part of a secretary position. So I do have some examples of like job roles and responsibilities for each of the executive members. But from first blush, the treasurer should really be handling the financial piece, and the agenda is usually set by the executive director, so that you wouldn't have to do that, but that you would, and that you may potentially be compiling the information to send out in the email, but not that you would have to be actually doing the work of having to actually create those pieces. So that would be something like the first thing I would say. Note taking is generally the secretary piece, and then usually that then goes to the executive director to then provide sort of the minutes then for the board after the meeting.
Yeah, it can be really challenging, and I certainly have been in that position where you are kind of handling more than you should be handling, but those are, some of the duties of your board members. And, the longer you continue to do those things, the less likely it will be that they will want to take them on. So if you can really go to the bylaws and sit down with the executive committee and talk through, these are the responsibilities. I really need your support and help to do this. And then just, work that through with them directly, because it's not a good practice to continue to take it on. And that is really part of their work. And as Joy had spoken earlier about, you really want to have that commitment from them when they join the board and have those job descriptions or volunteer descriptions specifically about each of their roles, so they understand, what it is that they are taking on and signing up for. But I know how challenging it can be once you have started doing that, and they have the expectation that you'll do it all. So
yeah, and I think if you're in a transition, because sometimes that happens as well, if you're in a transition where you lack that particular person that should be doing that, it should be considered something that you are able to delegate the work out. So I don't think that we shouldn't dump it on our secretaries. It should definitely be something where everybody takes a piece of that work if there is like a void in that particular position.
Got it. Thank you. And quick follow-up in defense of my board, they are fantastic. However, through transition and then COVID really changed things since we were so remote. So I, of course, took that over. Now that we're back in person, things are back to what I call normal, quote unquote. I need to remind them that we have that. So final thing, we do have new board members that are adding. One is actually being onboarded today. I was thinking it's probably not good to ask a new board member to take on a position like that, because I'm afraid that they would not be able to immerse themselves fully. It might be a little overwhelming. Do you agree to not have a new board member take on a position like that?
I mean, I think it depends on their experience and their comfortability. So if they have been a part of boards before and they feel comfortable, I think that's perfectly fine. But yes, if this is maybe a first step into being on a board, then maybe just let them kind of get their feet wet and for a few months or so before giving them something. But I think it depends. I think asking, we kind of had that a little bit in this presentation. Asking is never, I think that you should always be asking.
Right.
You never know what people might want to be able to do or how they might want to share their talents. It could be completely opposite from what their profession is or what you might know them to be. So I think go ahead and ask.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Christine. Anyone else have any comments or questions that they want to weigh in?
I have a question. How would you suggest moving a passive board into a more active role? So if they're not very active, but you want them to step up, how would you suggest making that happen?
That's a great question, Amanda. So I think that in general, it does kind of start with some of that planning. So as you go through some of your annual things and you're looking at different, we always look at our mission, vision, and then see how it's still aligning with what we would like to see out of the organization. That would be a good point to be able to say, hey, we also want to make this sort of shift in our board participation. And then to start to really look at creating a board sort of roles, responsibilities, expectations sheet that the board is then involved with, because I'm sure that in the end they see whether it's potentially burnout or maybe they haven't been engaging other volunteers to create that pipeline. Those are some of the things that you can start to suggest to have as structure that hopefully then your board will have the buy-in to move forward and that become part of the organization. So, I think that comes also from the organization committee, talking to some of those folks to see, hey, I want to really start to build in some of these structures to help shape that culture of a working board. And then kind of tying into, Christine, what your question too, is to also consider that when I talk about an organization and pipeline, consider that board members and even chairs or volunteers that maybe they're not really wearing, especially board members, not more than like 2 hats, right? We have a lot of things going on, and a lot of times people are super passionate in like all the committees, but encourage people to just have like 2 different hats that they're really 1 to 2 different hats that they're wearing, and that we're finding other people to be able to help with other things. But I think to move them from passive to active, I think it starts with setting some of those expectations as a board, and really kind of listing out what do we want to see from our future leadership.
Yeah. And I think also clearly understanding what it is that they are interested in doing and kind of matching those things up too. You know, making certain that you have them involved in something that they feel comfortable in leading or being a part of. That's really important. Sometimes we just kind of throw a lot of things out there and think, okay, everybody's going to want to do all of these different things, but maybe that's not really something that is of interest to them. So really finding out what that is as well is really important.
Go ahead, say something.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, it's Norma.
Hi, Norma.
Over and over, I asked my board to raise money, fundraising. And it seems to go in one ear and out the other every meeting. What can I do to motivate them to get out and help us raise money?
Sure. I think that first and foremost, whether it's $5 or $500, board members should be contributing in that way. I know that they devote a lot of time, but I think that that helps incredibly when someone is going out to sponsors or partners to say, hey, we've got 100% board participation. So I would start with that. And then as you kind of move into, it is a little bit of developing a campaign maybe, or I don't know if you do sponsorships or things like that, being able to provide, you know, really kind of an outline of all of the different ways that people are involved or that can be involved, in sponsorship or partnership, and having kind of that piece that they can then also use to kind of help as a talking point. Going back to kind of how I used to have that little trophy that I would give out like at each board meeting to just give like a kudos to one of my board members. I did actually put them in competition with one another at one point for fundraising. And it was really just for our sponsorships. So I created a nice booklet that kind of dictated every single event and activity that we did that required sponsors. I gave that to them and I just pulled teams basically. And I actually did put them in competition with each other at one point. It was just fun, and then it just kind of was able to show what they were able to bring in. And mostly they were talking to their other colleagues and friends at different businesses. So they had a chance to kind of do that together. So making it fun sometimes kind of helps that way. I don't know if that's, not all boards, will appreciate that, but mine just happened to be okay at that time to have a little fun with it.
That's great.
Fun.
A little bit of competition there.
We like to have
also
fun.
a lot of, organizations have a get or give kind of policy. So, either, you either give the $500 or you get it from someone, which would count towards your contribution. So that is something that you might consider as well. And a lot of organizations have board members to actually sign on the dotted line that they will, contribute a certain amount or get that certain amount to give to the organization. So that's also another way. Any other comments, questions?
So I have another one. What do you do when you have a toxic board member? Like, how do you handle that?
Do you have term limits? No.
What's the beginning of their term?
Oh, okay. Oh gosh, that's hard. I guess it depends a little bit on what the situation is, but redirecting efforts and talents and, or very specifically putting them on a project that might be solo, maybe they're on their own for that because it's something that that they're an expert or have kind of a passion in. It's and honestly, I do kind of make it a little bit of a rule that we're here to be the solutions. folks. We're the ones that are kind of finding the solutions for our communities, for our business owners, for our property owners. You can have constructive criticism, and that's totally fine to lead discussions. But we're not here to air out negative, antidotes about things that are happening outside. So it's I think redirection into like, okay, well, how do we solve for what might be considered something that's a challenge, and then giving them a purpose, something very purposeful that they can also just be proud of. And then now we're just talking about the great work that they're doing.
Yeah, and then also, involving, if it gets to a certain level, the board chair to kind of lead that process if there's a lot of, turmoil or, challenges there in communication, really letting the board chair be, lead in that regard, because that really is part of their role as well. So. Any other final comments, questions?
I wanted to make a quick comment.
Yes.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
And hello, Joy.
Hello.
My name is Harumi Murata with the City of Oakley, and we currently don't have a chamber nor the Main Street District Board, and I'm really hoping to start surveying the population and demographic. And I think the volunteer sheet that you had was fantastic, and I would love to tweak a little bit and use them at the local event in the future. So if you could share with us, that'd be wonderful.
Yes, we can do that.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think we are coming up on the end of this particular session. And so grateful and thankful for Joy for our excellent presentation.